Well, welcome to Perspectives Online and On Air from WFSU Public Media. I'm Tom Flanigan. Our program using the Zoom platform was pre-recorded on Tuesday, the 26th of January for playback on Thursday, the 28th. The show to appear on both WFSU FM and our WFSU Public Media Facebook page. Well, last week we talked about a project to restore the historic squares in downtown Apalachicola, Florida. And of course, there likely would not even be an Apalachicola, Florida, without the river and the bay that also bear that name. And those watery resources, if you've been keeping up with this, have been quite a topic of interstate contention for literally decades. And there are also some late-breaking developments in that dispute, as well as new initiatives to kind of more carefully examine what's going on with this remarkable and complex eco and economic system and how it might be restored and preserved for everyone to enjoy. So we have a phenomenal panel here. Let's go around and meet everybody. If you have a moment to share with us on that score, we say hi first to kind of the progenitor of the whole project here, Georgia Ackerman, who joined Apalachicola Riverkeeper oh my gosh, just over 3 years ago, and serves as Riverkeeper and Executive Director. And you may remember Georgia ran in North Florida Ecotourism Company for nearly a decade, where she spent time learning about the river and has done the river trek and all of this kind of thing. Georgia, thank you for putting all this together, and it's just a delight to see your face again.
Thanks, Tom. I'm glad to be here. Appreciate it.
You also brought some great friends too. Sandra Brooke is a faculty member at the FSU Coastal and Marine Lab since 2013, and her research has been focusing on hard bottom communities in both shallow and deep waters, specifically understanding their distribution, abundance, and physiology. And also, she is involved in the estuarine ecosystems as the lead investigator in the Apalachicola Bay System Initiative, or ABSI, ABSI. Sandra, we want to hear all about that today, and thank you for coming on and explaining it to us here in a few minutes.
Thank you for having us.
Jim Estes from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, where he has been for nearly 35 years. And it's also predecessor agency for us old timers, the Florida Freshwater Fish and Game Commission. Sometimes, Jim, we kind of make the error and hearken back to the old title there on the agency. But during that time, you have accumulated a vast treasure trove of experience. And I'm happy that you're here to share that with us today.
Thank you, Tom.
Anita Grove joins us as well. Now, you may recall the last time we had Anita on, she was heading up the Chamber of Commerce over in Apalachicola, but she also has been very much involved in the overall political aspect there, because she is now an Apalachicola City Commissioner, and in that stead, she joins us today on Perspectives. Anita, always a delight to see you.
Good to see you, Tom, and thank you for having us.
Well, you know, it would not be Apalachicola without its historic industry of record, which is, of course, the seafood industry. And a fourth-generation seafood worker from Apalachicola joins us in the persona of Shannon Hartsfield. His family's livelihood has always been tied to Apalachicola Bay, and he is president of the Franklin County Seafood Workers Association, also chairs the Seafood Management Assistance Resource and Recovery Team, and has been working with scientists from the University of Florida and is helping out with the initiative that we just talked about, the ABSI research that's going on. And Shannon, good to see you, sir, and can't wait to pick up on what exactly is going on with the Gulf right now. We understand there's a moratorium. We'll get into that too, okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. The chair of the Franklin County Commission is our guest as well on this program, Ricky Jones, lifetime resident of East Point. His parents owned an oyster house and retail market for most of life. And I just bet you, Commissioner, that over the years, my family has stopped by that market to pick up fresh shrimp and other delights of the deep on multiple occasions. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you, Tom. Good to be here.
Well, I guess that takes us full circle then to exactly what the initiative here that we mentioned at the beginning is all about. Precisely what is the Apalachicola Bay System Initiative, and also why is it needed? We've had several kinds of things like this over the years. Georgia, you want to start us off on this, and what's the genesis? How did this particular thing get started?
Most of us on this panel, Tom, serve as Community Advisory Board committee members for the ABSI project, if you will. And I'm going to hand it right over to Dr. Brooke so she can give the overarching view of how the project came into being. And then each of us are glad to talk about our role in the group as well. Sandra?
Yes, thank you, Georgia. So the Apalachicola Bay System Initiative, it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, so we call it ABSI for short. Yes, the Bay has been studied a great deal. A lot of the work was done a long time ago, back in the 80s and 90s. There has been a lot of work done since then, and there's been a lot of work done since the fishery crashed in 2012 and 13. What often happens with science, though, is that it doesn't make it into the arena where it can be applied by managers, resource managers. And so part of the ABSI process is going to be taking research that is pertinent and meaningful for management and restoration and incorporating that into management plans. What we are trying to do at the moment is understand what caused the decline. And everybody has a number of different ideas about what caused the oysters to crash. But usually when a system crashes, it's not just one thing. So it's a multitude of things. So to understand what happened, and then to try and understand why it is that despite best efforts, the oysters haven't come back. So these are things that we're looking at, and that information will feed directly into management.
Okay, from the state's viewpoint, then, Jim Estes, let's talk about the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission there. Part of the solution, of course, the current moratorium we're talking about here. I take it then that this is going to be trying to look at a multitude of impacting factors when it comes to what's going on with the lower river and the bay and the estuarine ecosystem that's there, right?
Yes, sir. In fact, I guess our first step, honestly, to take some action, unfortunately, was to suspend harvest in the bay. And that was needed, as Sandra said, that we've done a number of things over the last 7 or 8 years to try to help the oyster population without impacting the fishermen. But things have gotten so bad, I would say, off the top of my head, we've probably lost at least 95% of our oysters. Prior to that time, in 2012, we had 1,000 fishermen out there that were fishing the bay, that landed oysters in the bay. 2019, we only had 47. And in 2019, we only had 4 of them that were able to even eke out a living. And so the collapse of the oyster population has affected the economy, and it has certainly impacted the culture. And so there are some things that we've done in the past, which include putting culch or shell or substrate on the bottom that just simply don't work now. And so we're trying to figure out how we can adapt that and make it work.
Hand off then to Shannon Hartsfield. Are you among the 4 that are still making a living from this, or are you pretty much wiped out as far as the seafood business that you have been pursuing is concerned, Shannon?
No, I actually quit harvesting oysters in probably middle of 2012. I started working on trying to rebuild the bay. I worked and ran quite a few programs of using the oystermen rebuilding the bay, and then I worked with the NIFWIF, the UF and FWC project for several years. So I've been trying to stay close to the bay and anticipate as much as I can in the bay, and try to help, the bay to recovery. We're seeing a lot of great things happen right now, not because of just the closures, just because we've been getting some pretty good river flows in the last couple of years, and it's changed our bay a lot of life is coming back in our bay, and we're seeing a lot of that. So this is a really good thing.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear that sense of optimism, because what we'd been hearing, at least, in the past couple of years, was, hey, wild oystering, we might as well write that off. It's all going to be, a controlled farm type situation, leasing, that sort of thing. You're saying, though, there still may be a future for wild seafood in the bay?
Absolutely, absolutely. We've seen a lot of life in the bay. Hopefully, with FWC and FSU, the way we're going, we can help it recover a little quicker. We don't know when we'll get our next drought season again, and that's going to change the dynamics of what's going on in the bay. But I think it has more of an opportunity to be a commercial harvest again, the approach we're approaching now.
Well, certainly that's going to be of importance to the folks who maybe are not day-to-day involved with the seafood industry. Anita Grove, first for you, and then County Commissioner Chair Ricky Jones along this line. The seafood industry was just about the end-all and be-all of Apalachicola almost since its founding. That has changed in recent years. You're more dependent on tourism and a few other things here. What does it mean to have, though, a continued vibrant and profitable seafood industry in Apalachicola?
Well, I've always said, being the longtime chamber director, I would have people tell me, "Oh, seafood's dead." Whether it's shrimp or whatever. "Oh, it's dead. It's not coming back." And some old time fishermen, one being Buddy Ward, always said that things are cyclical, especially in the natural world. And one year you'll have great harvest, next year you won't, or next few years. So one thing I noticed over that long period of time was, anytime you're a small community and you have something to export to the rest of the world, especially something that's highly valued, as Apalachicola wild-caught oysters were, you're kind of in the catbird seat. You have something to give the rest of the world. If you just have people coming in and you're spending the night and going fishing, yeah, that's part of our economy. But it's still not quite the dollar value that oysters were bringing in. And it always impressed me that we could sell as much as we could grow out of that bay, and that they were highly prized. All we needed to do was to protect the reputation of Apalachicola Bay oysters. And, there were years of 2012, I believe, it was $8 million in docks and not dockside value, but in pounds of meat harvested. That's not in the shell. So that's a lot. And I think the dockside value is about $9 million. So, that's a lot for a rural community, a community of 11,000 people. That's a nice industry, and it works perfectly with the bay. It keeps the bay clean. It does impact the bay, but in more of a positive way. And then it aligns well with tourism. So it was a pretty great economy. Plus our populace likes to be self-employed, and most people were self-employed. So they've turned to other means of making a living. But after we've met with a lot of the oystermen, they still want to continue. And there is a strong cultural heritage there. And I think it all works really well, keeping things in line so that they're not overtaxed. So.
Yeah, well, you brought up the magic word, taxes. And Ricky Jones, from the revenue standpoint of Franklin County, that has to have a major interest for you guys, because let's face it, there's not a whole bunch, particularly with the timber industry wiped out as was by Hurricane Michael. You don't have a lot of kind of hip pocket alternatives when it comes to generating revenue for the county, do you?
No. So economic diversification is going to be more important for Franklin County than it's ever been. But at the same time, I don't think the county's given up on the seafood industry whatsoever, especially the wild-caught oyster. Anita hit on some things that are really right. So tourism is more of it's definitely an import to your economy, but the exporting economy is something that we definitely need in Franklin County. And I can't think right now off the top of our head, seafood would be the only thing that we were really exporting. So for a community our size or for a county our size, to be able to see that come back is definitely a good thing, not just for the economy, but for the people that are tied to this bay, people that have spent their life there, people like my dad and Shannon's dad. This is pretty much all they've ever done. And they can tell you things about that bay and you're like, really? But it's because they've spent so many countless hours harvesting the wild-caught oyster that literally millions around the world have enjoyed. And I think it needs to come back. And I think we're seeing steps in the right direction to do that.
Well, one thing that has gone on since time immemorial is the brand of the Apalachicola oyster. That is something that has not diminished. And you're right, Ricky, that is known still worldwide. And I have people way up north that will call me. They know I live down here around the coast and say, boy, we used to get Appalachian oysters all the time. Whatever happened to that? And they're still inquiring about it. It is legendary. Before we get on, I just pulled up something that just moved. And if we start with you, maybe Georgia, if you can react to this a little bit. The state of Georgia has now signed an agreement with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that for the first time formally ratifies the rights of 2 suburban Atlantic counties to use Lake Lanier for drinking water. Lake Lanier, of course, being part of the river system that feeds into the Apalachicola. So, federal litigation among Georgia, Alabama, and Florida over who gets to use water in the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint River system has been ongoing for decades, as we mentioned at the outset of the program. So any reaction there to what I just read, Georgia? What do you think that will do, if anything?
I can't speak to the specifics of that right now, Tom. I can say that litigation affecting our watershed has been going on for over 30 years. When we were talking before about oysters as an indicator, oysters in biological terms are an indicator species, right? They tell us a lot, and Jim and Sandra could talk for a long time about this with biology backgrounds, but they're indicator species for the health of an ecosystem, but they're also an indicator species for the health of Franklin County and our economy and our ecology here. And just as anecdotally, when we had the collapse of the oyster industry and when the fishery collapse was declared in 2013, there was a lot of media attention around it, and we were getting inquiries literally from all over the country. Again, oysters being the indicator species. Currently, Florida versus Georgia will return to the Supreme Court on February 22nd. We could get a resolution shortly after that. That remains to be seen, but that case has been going on since 2013. So many years of waiting. Separately, in federal court, Apalachicola Riverkeeper and conservation partners have a legal challenge to the Army Corps of Engineers Water Control Manual. And as everybody's aware, the Army Corps of Engineer is who controls decisions and how water is moved through the reservoirs and ultimately down to the Apalachicola River, which sits below the Chattahoochee and Flint. So decisions that are made for this entire watershed that 3 states share of 20,000 square miles, nearly 20,000 square miles. A lot of people are impacted, and there's got to be a way to share the water so that we are not hurt at the end of the line. That freshwater flow making its way down the river out into the floodplain and nourishing the river and the bay is so important. You know, in fact, that freshwater helps the productivity and the health of the west coast of Florida down to Tampa. So it's really important that we take care of it. So the health of the Apalachicola River and Bay is important to the entire west coast of Florida. We know that freshwater flow from the river is important for the productivity of species southward to Tampa. So it needs to be taken care of.
Okay, on to you then, if we could, Sandra Brooke, when it comes to a follow-up to what that Georgia just said. that the conventional wisdom seemed to be, at least for the non-scientific among us, which is certainly me, that it was just a question of that balance between fresh and salt water that was the real bugaboo bear of Apalachicola Bay, and having the negative impact on seafood, particularly bottom dwellers like oysters. The project that you're now involved with, the ABSI project, are you saying that the research you're doing is going to go beyond just that simple equation? You're going to be looking at some other things too?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a number of things that could have contributed to the loss of oysters within the bay. And during the drought season, we had a number of bad droughts. The salinity goes up because the freshwater input is reduced. And what happens then is that a number of predators come in to the bay. Normally, those predators would be pushed out by the freshwater, but they come in, and especially things like oyster drills, they can really do a number on the oysters. They're pretty voracious predators. So we had that problem. But you know, the flow into the river is driven by two factors. One is climate, and the other one is management. And of course, when we're getting enough rain, as Shannon said, in the last few years, we've had a nice amount of rain. And so we are seeing life come back, but it hasn't completely fixed the problem. And so that sort of implies that that wasn't the only source of the problem. We've also had a situation, you know, oysters are funny little beasts in that they're not like fishes that, you know, if you reduce a fish stock, then hopefully you take the pressure off and they come back. Oysters make their own habitat. So when the oyster populations go down, their habitat goes down, and that sort of gets into a spiral because the oysters have to make the reefs. And so what we've also seen is that the habitat has deteriorated as well. So then when you get into this kind of a toilet bowl type of situation where you've got so few oysters in the bay that they can't produce enough spat to bring the population back up again. So it's like this, you know, number of different things that create a perfect storm. And I think that's probably where we're at the moment. So what we have to do is understand why they're not coming back at the moment. Is it habitat? Is it there's not enough animals in the system? Is it because of the water? And how do we maybe work with the Army Corps to determine or to come up with some scenarios that will help us maybe bring down the water when we need it, rather than just saying we need more water. So we are trying to look at different things that might be influencing the recovery of the oyster populations beyond just the water, which is absolutely important.
And beyond just the current moratorium. And Jim Estes, I believe it was what, 5 years is what we're looking at initially. It could be longer, I'm sure, but at least 5 years for putting a kibosh on the harvesting of wild oysters in the bay.
Yes, sir. We're committed to 5 years at the most. We want to get the restoration going. I, like Shannon, I feel pretty optimistic, but just like Sandra said, this is not an easy thing to figure out why some of the actions that we have taken and not been successful. And we need to figure that out in order to responsibly, you know, spend the money that we got from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation.
Okay, Shannon Hartsfield, you literally know just about every square inch of the bottom of that bay. What is your gut telling you about what's going on down there?
I just know it's hard to say one particular. I mean, it's so much of a change in the last 15 years has happened in our bay. The biggest thing that I've noticed in over the last few years is we have a hard issue for spat to set and take hold. See, we're not having the spat like we used to have. Now we're in the last 9 months, we're seeing more spat in the bay than we have in 8 years. So pinpointing something particular is hard to do because there's been so much changes that's happened.
Okay, yeah, and as both Sandra and Jim had pointed out, it looks like you've got a lot of moving parts in this machine right here. It's not just one or two factors, it's a bunch of things that are interconnected in ways that hopefully this research will help to figure out and what that does. Anita Grove, back to, again, just what is your vision for Apalachicola now that you've gone from the chamber side over into the city commission side there? because we talked about that really neat plan for the squares and stuff last week. But how do you see this impacting the future of Apalachicola, which many people said would probably no longer resemble its past?
Well, I mean, if the project, the ABSI project is trying to determine where we start. There have been restoration efforts done since 2013. We've put new bars in. We've tried fossilized shell. We've tried rock. We've tried shell. And some of them were working, some of them are not. Like Shannon said, we started to see the bay come back, and we'd get little tiny oysters about the size of a quarter, and then all of a sudden they wouldn't stick, they wouldn't stay. So what's causing that? And I think at this point, since we were fortunate enough to get Triumph Grant and the FSU Marine Lab on board to figure out what's going on, what is the best substrate, where is the best place to put it, and instead of, because we all don't live underwater and we're not oysters, so we don't know exactly what the causes are. So we can keep coming up with scenarios, but we need to test some of them out. So now we have some scientists who are part of the project who are doing models on the river, doing models on the bay. And as Sandra said, one of the biggest things is the freshwater inflow. That is a big part of our bay. I mean, it's not just oysters. We've lost 40% of the tupelo tree forest in the floodplain over the last 20 years. So it's stopping, finding out what's causing it. And then I think it is so much of an opportunity that we all believe in. And I don't think we do that lightly. I think we believe in it because we think it can come back, that it is a good component of our economy. And I know people who, they work in many people who harvest oysters. They also flounder. They also may clean houses or build houses on the island. They have a multi-income base, but it is, I think, still a valid way to earn a living, and a very sustainable economy, which is what most cities look for, is a sustainable economy. Sure, we could build up 10 buildings and get in call centers and all of that, but that's going to pick up and move someday too. This is a part of what we do, and it blends well with what our bay is, but now we have to adjust to the 21st century in that somebody's taken the water from it. So we have to figure out how we can make this restoration stick, even with all the parameters we have. And just figuring them out is not easy, but we have a broad-based group of stakeholders, myself, the Commissioner, County Commissioner Jones, Shannon, Georgia. We have all of these stakeholders who are on the committee asking all these hard questions, saying, okay, what will make it successful? What do we need to do when we're at this point? And we have some facilitators moving us through monthly meetings to try and come up with our ways of addressing all these issues. But Sandra can speak to that.
And we'll get to, yeah, go ahead, Sandra, please comment on that if you would.
Yes, I was going to bring up the Community Advisory Board. I had forgotten to mention it previously when I was talking about ABSI, but it is an absolutely critical component. I believe we have around 23 stakeholders that encompass people like Shannon, the oystermen. We've got 2 oystermen. We've got seafood industry. We have people like Anita and Ricky and Jim, from the agencies. We've got Georgia. We have a really good, caring, informed group of people that know things as individuals that they can contribute to the group. I don't know what Shannon knows. I could never hope to know what Shannon knows, or Jim or Georgia, but together they bring that expertise, and we talk about things and we hash them out, and we are going to find a way forward that the stakeholders can buy into. Just doing science by itself does not necessarily translate to action or anything that people believe in. And that's a very important component of what we're trying to do, because this is a small community. And if we don't have buy-in, then, for management or restoration, it's not going to work. People have to sort of believe in it and buy into it and abide by the regulations that come up. So this is absolutely critical. And I've learned an incredible amount from just being around these people. So, and it's going to continue beyond the life of ABSI. We're looking at ways of doing that. So we don't just produce this thing and then have it languish.
If this works, if we do see a resurrection of the seafood industry, starting with the oysters and then the entire ecosystem, ultimately comes back to even a fraction of what it was before. And let me ask you, Chair Jones, since you've been involved with the seafood industry for so many years, as has Mr. Hartsfield here, are the people to make that seafood industry thrive and profitable still going to be around? A lot of younger folks, as we've seen the seafood industry kind of piddle out over the years, have moved away because the jobs weren't available. All those seafood houses that were lined along 98, all the way from MedArt over through Carabel and East Point and over to St. George Island and ultimately to Apalachicola. Most of those gone nowadays. Will there be enough people to revive the industry that depends on seafood?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, well, I can just tell you, Tom, I can remember, just like Shannon probably does, growing up here in East Point, which we both did, there were as many as 26 seafood houses just in East Point alone. But you also were talking about a time that the only economy in Franklin County was seafood. There was no other economy. So yes, having a place for it to come back to, I guess is the key phrase that we're looking at here. And I can tell you that's something that the county commission has been focused on. We haven't talked about changing zoning or doing different things. If the industry comes back, it has to have somewhere to come back to. So when I mentioned earlier economic diversification, it's not excluding commercial seafood. It's in addition to bringing back commercial seafood to Franklin County.
So that becomes an overall piece part of a much larger puzzle then, is what you're kind of looking at.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hey, we have a very special perspectives, and we're so glad you could be a part of it, both online and on air here. And if you miss all or part of any of our offerings, they're available online, not just on the WFSU.org website, but also on our WFSU Public Media Facebook page. And we try to have the most recent program up on both places just as quick as we can after it airs on the radio, so you can revisit it as many times as you'd like and pick up on some things maybe that you possibly had missed before. Well, Georgia Ackerman, as far as Apalachicola River Keeper is concerned, of which you're the exec director here, you see this project moving forward. What specifically here do you want Sandra and Jim and the other research components of this, the people involved in that, to come back to you? And then what happens to that information? How does that help, besides having a whole bunch of 3-ring binders sitting around just chock full of all kinds of good information and charts and graphs and that sort of stuff?
I haven't seen a 3-ring binder, and I don't know when everything's electronic. It's all in a Dropbox and all these other fabulous storage places. So always remember to back up that hard drive is what I would remind everybody, because when you crash your laptop and lose all your stuff, it's unpleasant. River Keeper, one of the roles that we play in terms of participating in the community advisory board is bringing the message of the connectivity of the river and the bay. And we all understand that this is a connected system, and the river and the bay, the river and the bay are connected system. We also interact regularly with members of the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint stakeholders group, which is a tri-state group. So we try to bring in topics and ideas and things that are happening there. And then part of my job as River Keeper, of course, being up and down the watershed and interacting with other counties, we try to bring in some messaging there. River Keeper is a nonprofit organization, and we're membership based. So part of what we do is try to speak up for the river, so to speak, as part of the Waterkeeper Alliance. So the learning experience, as well as Sandra has mentioned, getting to hear from other experts in the different fields, from folks that are at the table, at the advisory board is also really helpful in terms of hearing different perspectives, if you will.
Okay, and Sandra Brooke, take us out on the into the bay and the river here for an hour or two here. How does it work? How does the accumulation of this research data take place?
Okay, so Georgia's right. We produce a whole lot of graphs and a whole lot of Excel spreadsheets, and that in itself is not terribly useful. But so what we're doing with that is integrating that information into a number of platforms or models that can be used. So for example, we have two hydrodynamic modelers, and one of them is looking at flows through the watershed, and the other one is looking at how the river and the ocean interact in the bay. And so rather than just looking at a whole pile of spreadsheet, what we see is this dynamic system that the modelers can query. And so we can say, if we have X amount of water flowing in, what is the salinity likely to be over here on this oyster reef? Or what's it likely to be over there on that reef? And so we can play around with this information and come up with different scenarios of, if we have a dry year, what happens? There may be better places to restore. If we look into the future and see we're not going to get as much water, so maybe those old places that were fantastic oyster reefs aren't that way anymore. So we can use these, what we call decision support tools, to try and drive some of our decisions about management and restoration. And that's just one example. We have predictive habitat models that we're generating. We're trying to work out how the reef heights changed over time, which will inform restoration. So that's the kind of what I'm hoping the difference will be between ABSI and sort of your normal grant type system, is that that information will be fed directly into support tools that management and restoration can use to good effect. So we want the data to be useful. So that's kind of the ultimate goal. And then with the Community Advisory Board, we'll take the good parts of those tools and the options that they come up with, and the Community Advisory Board said, no, we don't want to do this part, but let's do that instead. And we can take that and drive it forward, hopefully to a good end, so Shannon can get back out in the water again.
Hey, well, I can tell he's itching to get back out again, but one wonderful thing about science is that it has an awful lot to say about places other than where it originated. Jim Estes, I'm thinking with the multitude of river and bay systems we have all over Florida, what's going on with ABSI here may have applicability to other places around the state too, that may have a seafood industry or some other factors of economic development that are useful to that particular place. Do you see some cross-pollination going on here?
Yes, sir, absolutely. In fact, we have oyster populations all along the East Coast of the United States, and certainly in the Gulf of Mexico, that have some needs. And the things that we're learning here certainly should help inform what we can do in other places by taking some active action. So yes, sir, you're exactly right.
Okay, terrific. And that also means, again, back to Anita Grove, and let's talk about what you see, I guess, part again of that overall mosaic of industry, of economic development, that taking place within Apalachicola, perhaps not to the degree that it was historically, but moving forward and being a part of that tourism industry. Do you see maybe a revival of like seafood houses, raw bars, those kinds of things popping up once we get the out from under this COVID situation here, starting to return to Apalachicola proper?
Oh, definitely. We haven't lost a lot of our restaurants in terms of, because of the oyster collapse. We've been serving the aquaculture oysters from Alligator Point. Also, we've always depended on oysters from Texas and Louisiana, because certain times of the year the demand is just so much more than we're able to provide. But certainly, I don't think the infrastructure to serve the oysters nor the reputation has left us. Being the head of the chamber, I had a unique perspective. I actually had two men fly here from New Zealand, and they were coming to the States, trying oysters all over the country. They had landed on the West Coast and rented a car, and they were going everywhere. Apalachicola was one of their premier destinations. So there is a strong interest, and anybody who's ever eaten any of our oysters knows that they are just superb. So I think if we can get the oysters back, will definitely, the desire will be there. And one thing I was, an analogy came to mind when Sandra was talking, just so you understand the committee and this project. Many times we've had university students and faculty come in and do studies, but they're might be done separately from other things. This particular study and committee, it's sort of like a design build project. We're starting with nothing, and all of these people who are coming in, Shannon and Jim and Georgia and Ricky, they all have experience, years and years of experience. They also have different life experience and data they bring to the table. So all of that's being worked into this plan. And I actually this morning have been working on the successor committee to this committee, so that when this project is has been quote unquote completed, we'll have another body that will be associated with the state, the agencies, the funders, and we'll keep it going beyond just this project, because we all realize, being here for a long time, that plans can be made and put on the shelf, and that's not going to do us any good.
And we're going to see some changes as far as, even if you disregard climate change completely, there's still going to be some, should we say, modifications of situation down on the Gulf, even when you have a heavy storm that blows through. Shannon Hartsfield, was that really gratifying for you, that very often, academic research is on one level and really practical firsthand knowledge of a situation, never the twain shall meet? When you were brought on board here to be part of this whole situation, and for them to tap your expertise and long knowledge as to, here's exactly what I see going on in this area?
When I took over as the Seafood Work Association president, I took over as my livelihood, trying to help my livelihood. So I took the opportunity to work with all of these different agencies that's come in and learn from them. When we put the SMART group together, we was asking FWC and FDAX and ANR all these questions. We was doing it to learn, but it helped us to understand what was actually getting done. So that gave us the opportunity to step forth, anticipate in all of this. So I've jumped in with both feet, and not looked backwards, because I see myself back on that bay, oystering again. I still have I'll have all my vessels all working order. I go out on the water with FSU every chance I get, and so I'm dedicated, 100% dedicated. Got a lot of family and friends wants to be back out on the water. There's a lot of guys that's down in other areas that normally works here, that's putting the pressure in other areas, that's harvesting down South Florida, and it's putting a lot more pressure on harvesting down there now because of that. But there's a lot of guys that's looking forward, that actually quit oystering before the closure, because they seen what was going on and they support this closure. The handful of guys that's not supporting now the closure is really are not looking forward to seeing this bay recover. They're not. They think there's no problem with the bay, and that's what's finding this hardship to understand. Some of these guys saying, "Oh, it's coming back. It's going to come back," and yet it's been declining, the whole time. So this is a process and ongoing thing that I think is going to be good down the road for the future of Apalachicola. That's going to try to, once it gets rebuilt to a certain extent to wherever it could be rebuilt, it will maintain, because it's going to be something in place to keep from happening what has happened in the past.
That's a really good point. And Ricky Jones, if I can ask you, is that a hard sell job with some other folks who still are attached to the seafood industry to let them know that, hey, this is one way to move forward productively to try to recapture at least a part of what historically has been there, and here's how y'all can help out with that?
Yeah, it might be a little bit, but here's the thing. You have to find out what's the right and best thing to do, and you have to pursue that. So I think we're on a steady course. You know, there are always some that will be for or against anything, especially if they deem it to be coming from the government in any way. So there's always going to be that issue. But, you know, at the end of the day, you have to do what's the right thing to do. And if there's a way to bring this bay back in any form like it used to be, then we owe it to not only ourselves, but to the generations coming after us to do that pursuit. It is very much worth the pursuit.
That is beautifully put, folks. We're kind of running short of time here. Let me give everyone an opportunity to kick in any final comments or thoughts that they may have. Let's start off with you, Georgia Ackerman.
I would just remind everybody that Florida's Apalachicola River is the largest in our state in terms of freshwater flow. It's a remarkable floodplain. It's an incredible bay. And I look forward to working with everybody and keeping it protected and making sure our state moves forward on a full-scale restoration plan.
And we'll also remind you that the Apalachicola River is a great kayaking opportunity too, especially once a year with the annual River Trek. And you can check out the River Trek information, which is also on the Riverkeeper website, or just give Georgia a call. She'll talk your ear off for at least an hour there. Sandra Brooke from the FSU Coastal and Marine Lab, your turn.
So the fishery closure has really benefited the research objectives because it takes away the artifacts or the things that happen associated with harvest, and it makes it a lot easier for us to interpret what we see because we don't have the harvesting going on. And so that benefits us, and that's one thing. But I just think it's, even though the fishery has declined precipitously and people weren't really making a living, I think we need to recognize that it's still incredibly brave of the oystermen to support a closure of their fishery. And so, you know, there are still some people that are opposed to it, and you know, for obvious reasons. But, you know, people like Shannon and the other people that supported it, I just think we should acknowledge that it was a brave thing to do. And I really hope that their sort of sacrifices helps bring back their fishery.
Thank you. Well put. Jim Estes from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. It's up to you, sir.
I think Tom, you heard a couple themes here. I think that one of the themes is that we have a bunch of people with a bunch of different expertise that we have working on the bay. And I will say that this is a little bit different than how government usually does things. A lot of times the government puts the government experts up there and they don't really work with some of the stakeholders that are being affected. And we certainly with the Citizens Advisory Board, with ABSI, we are certainly doing that. And I can tell you, sir, that I've been working, like I said, for 35 years in environmental, mostly research, honestly. You know, have a master's degree, but there's never a time that I go on Apalachicola Bay with Shannon that he doesn't teach me something. And so the strength of what we're doing is all this expertise. And I think that because we have all the folks that are going in the same direction, we're going to get her done.
Very good, sir. I love the optimism. Apalachicola City Commissioner Anita Grove, your turn, ma'am.
Well, I echo all the sentiments brought forth already. I do think, you know, in the future, we're looking for ways to grow more food. So we'll be growing food again. I think we'll always have an outlet to sell our food. And it's a very sustainable crop for Apalachicola Bay. It's been good to us for 100 years. I don't think there's any reason to throw it out. We just need to figure out how we can as Commissioner Jones said, diversify our economy. Also, take advantage of what we have naturally and get it back. And we're all putting a lot of effort to see that we get it back.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, it wouldn't be a party, of course, without the Apalachicola oysters harvested for so many years by folks like Shannon Hartsfield. And Sarah, it's your turn.
Yes, I'm looking forward to having a future. For the first time in a long time, I see a future back in the Bay. My dad is about to turn 73 years old, and I'd love to be able to take him back out with me and harvest oysters again with him. So this is the first time in a long time that I actually see a future back in the Bay.
Thank you, sir. And we'll end up with the chair of the Franklin County Commission, Ricky Jones. All yours, sir.
I can tell you, I've been very pleased to be a part of this discussion today and the continuing discussion going on. And I'm really excited to see not only what this ABSI group and this collection of different agencies from the state level, some, even local government levels, to take this plan and turn it into actionable implementation. And I, like the rest of the group, am very excited to see. I do believe that there will be another day where oysters are caught on Apalachicola Bay, wild caught oysters. I don't believe that the industries are, the new industry with aquaculture needs to go away for wild caught to exist, or vice versa. I think they both have their own merits and their own strengths, and I'm looking forward to seeing buckets going out of here again with our label, Apalachicola Bay oysters.
Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate it. The story of the Apalachicola Bay System Initiative from a multiple of stakeholders and initiators. Folks, thank you all for coming on Perspectives and telling us all about it today. Our program is brought to you, of course, by the good folks at WFSU Public Media. Our thanks to Taylor Cox, Paul Dam, Amy Diaz de Villegas, Brandon Brown, Tricia Moynihan, and Lydell Rawls. Our director of content, Kim Pelling, is also executive producer. I'm Tom Flanigan. Hey, let's get together and chat again next week right here on Perspectives.